E3 2018 is just around the corner, and of course, that means the prospect of new information relating to the Final Fantasy VII Remake is the topic on the edge of every gamer's lips. And to help stoke that wonderful fire even more, Square Enix has just announced that they will be hosting a press conference for the first time in 3 years, something which, if their last one is anything to go by, it should definitely be on everyone's radar. And if we cast our minds back to that fateful day in 2015 and run through some of the announcements that they actually made, well, hopefully you'll be reminded of just how awesome it was, at least from the perspective of the content they showed as opposed to how they actually presented it. Either way, not only did they show off announcement trailers for the Final Fantasy VII Remake and World of Final Fantasy, which had both been revealed during the Sony press conference a day earlier, but they teased Nier Automata for the first time. They showed off brand new gameplay footage for Kingdom Hearts 3, revealed that Star Ocean integrity and faithlessness was being localized, that Kingdom Hearts Unchained Key was also being localized, and that they'd founded a brand new studio called Tokyo RPG Factory, which will be working on a brand new IP called I Am Setsuna. And that's without even going into all the stuff they showed off for their Western titles. This year's press conference will actually take place on the 11th of June at 10 AM Pacific Time, 1 PM Eastern Time and 6 PM British Summer Time, but unlike what we saw 3 years ago, Square Enix are going to be taking a leaf out of Nintendo's book this year, as the whole thing should be pre-recorded as opposed to being hosted live. But before we get on to whether or not we think the Final Fantasy VII Remake will even be shown during this press conference, it's time to get everyone up to speed with what's actually been happening around the game in the past 6 to 7 months, including, of course, all the rumours that have been floating around over the past couple of weeks regarding its current status, that it might be releasing as late as 2023, and that one Nobuo Uematsu is now involved with the project. If you're looking for anything older than that though, I would definitely recommend checking out our previous video that we published back in October so that you're fully briefed on everything that we know about the Final Fantasy VII Remake up to this point. Alright, so the first thing we're going to take a look at is the Final Fantasy Farewell Stories 30th Anniversary Exhibition, which took place during January. Alongside tons of artwork, which was on display to showcase the impressive history of the franchise, there was a special section set aside for the Final Fantasy VII Remake. They showed off some concepts around different locations, such as Aerith's home, and they also displayed some of the concept art that Roberto Ferrari had created for Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie, the more ancillary members of Avalanche. In addition to this, there was also a talk that happened where Naoki Hamaguchi and Yoshinori Kitase were primarily talking about Mobius, and at one point Tetsuya Nomura just happened to appear as a guest during their talk. For your reference, at this point in time, Hamaguchi was actually still working as both the project lead on Mobius and the development lead on the Final Fantasy VII Remake simultaneously. But in March, he actually decided to step down from his role on Mobius, with Takahashi Shiraga replacing him as the project lead so that he could focus solely on the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Now, this talk was very much a closed-off affair. Square Enix allowed no photography or video footage whatsoever during Nomura's little segment, and we had to rely on tweets from those in attendance to try and understand what was actually being talked about during this time. And the big ticket item that got everyone on the edge of their seats was that Cloud had been redesigned because Nomura was just not happy with how he had looked when they previously showed off the game. And this all related to Square Enix taking development of the game in-house, as while Nomura did of course have oversight on the previous iteration of Cloud, at that time it was more driven by CyberConnect 2. But with a shift to in-house development, reworking things like Cloud's design became a real focus for Nomura. It's why, at the same time, they also revealed that Biggs, Wedge, and Jessie had also been reworked, which meant that the artwork they were actually showing off as part of the exhibition was potentially no longer current. Now, although no photographs or video footage was allowed, someone did actually manage to sneakily record some of the audio, and thanks to Hayne over at thelivestream.net, who very kindly translated it, we actually now have some context around those tweets that we previously saw and the changes that they announced. From this, we can glean that Biggs and Wedge weren't just reworked in a minor way. They've apparently had major changes compared to what we saw during the initial Final Fantasy VII Remake trailers. Jessie has also undergone some significant changes, with Nomura commenting that this was done because they wanted to make her look more beautiful and feminine. With Cloud, Nomura also explained that the changes have been made because he didn't feel as though the version of Cloud we had seen in those initial trailers and renders represented his personality that well at all. This new design will help to portray the fact that he's not all that put together, and they've looked to achieve this by also trying to make him look younger. Kitase and Hamaguchi also offered some insight as to why the Final Fantasy VII Remake is such a complicated project by using Aerith and Almyra's house as an example. They noted that in the original version of Final Fantasy VII, this house was surrounded by a body of water, but that they felt gamers didn't ever really think or care about why that might be the case. With the remake, they feel that things are very different. There needs to be a much higher degree of realism. They therefore don't feel as though they can just have random occurrences like that anymore without making them seem much more logical and logistically sound. In the case of the house, they've therefore decided to turn that random body of water into a river, but by doing so, that then affects other elements in that particular section of the world. For example, they have to then figure out how those things are going to interact with the river. And this all goes along with the narrative that senior figures have been putting on, where they've said that the aim is for the Final Fantasy VII Remake to be as revolutionary as the original was when it came out back in 1997. They were adamant that they wouldn't even do this project unless they legitimately felt they could make the remake one of the greatest games of all time. And that's why they ultimately decided to move away from CyberConnect 2, because they weren't producing content of the desired quality. And that moves us onto the current state of the project. In an official sense, we're pretty much blind at this point as to how complete they feel the game is, but there have been small pieces of information trickling out, some valid, some not. For example, a few months ago, Square Enix posted up a job listing for a level planner, which is actually still live now, and within this post there was an update on the status of the project. It talked about the need for the project to increase its quality to meet fan expectations, and it mentioned that they would be hiring a new core group of staff to help them achieve that. Timing though is everything, and we reported on this along with a whole ton of Western media as actually being the current status of the project as of a few months ago. However, after doing some additional digging, thanks to one of our commenters called Patrick J, the update found in the job description was actually lifted from an interview that Kitase had conducted with a Japanese company called MyNaviWorks, who, from what I can gather, are essentially a recruitment platform. At the moment, they have 96 jobs listed for Square Enix, but they're only actually hiring for 10 positions on the remake at present, including a writing director. Anyway, this interview was conducted back in July 2017, not too long after they had announced the decision to take development in-house, which coincided with the launch of a new recruitment page for Business Division 1 where they talked about similar things. In other words, this wasn't actually news. Well, it was, just not in March 2018. But either way, a lot can actually happen in 8 to 9 months on a project like this. There was also the recent rumour that came courtesy of an individual called Dan Sukasa. He responded to a thread on Reddit and painted a rather dim picture of how things are progressing with the Final Fantasy VII Remake. He started off by claiming that Nomura is barely involved with the project due to his involvement with Kingdom Hearts 3, as well as his physical location. He also claims that they basically started the project again from scratch following the decision to develop the game in-house after moving away from CyberConnect 2. And if this is referring to how things were over a year ago, which I believe Dan is, then this is potentially true. Nomura himself even spoke about the difficulties of managing both projects at the same time. But we shouldn't forget that he does have many capable staff members around him supporting him. Tai Yasui and Ria Nishi help him out incredibly with the Kingdom Hearts franchise, and on the Final Fantasy VII Remake, lest we forget that there are other prominent figures working on the project or at least overseeing it, like Yoshinori Kitase, albeit in a high-level supervisory role, Kazushige Najima helping out with a scenario, Naoki Hamaguchi working to make sure that the game is developing correctly, and Mitsunori Takahashi, who was the director of Dissidia Duodecim and the lead battle planner on Kingdom Hearts 2, is overseeing the battle systems. It's something that Nomura talked about to Famitsu, where he talked about the fact that Hamaguchi is in charge of making sure that things are ready for them to progress in the way that he wants, when he wants. And even though there are indeed quite a lot of fresh faces now working on the project, as many of the original creators have of course moved on, or maybe they're just busy working on other things, they are making sure that there are enough veterans from the original staff that are in key positions to impart knowledge and make sure that everything is staying as faithful to the original game as it needs to be. One example is Shintaro Tokai, who was in charge of magic effects on the original Final Fantasy VII, but went on to, amongst other things, serve as the art director on Final Fantasy X-2 and the graphics and visual effects director on the Final Fantasy XIII trilogy. He has joined the Final Fantasy VII Remake as an art and visual effects director, and he's looking forward to helping the next generation of creators. Personally, I think that if you can utilize young talent with fresh ideas that aren't constrained and pinned down by the burdens of nostalgia, then why wouldn't you take advantage of that? It's just important to have those mentors around to channel that enthusiasm in the right way. After all, the veterans working on the Final Fantasy VII Remake were once young upstarts themselves. Kitase, for example, was only 24 when he joined Square, and he ended up directing Final Fantasy VI alongside Hiroyuki Ito when he was 28. Nomura was only 21 when he joined Square, initially working as a debugger on Final Fantasy IV before becoming a more integral part of the graphics team working on Final Fantasy VI when he was 24. That's not to say that they're all youngsters working on the project now though. Tokai noted that there are many staffers working on the Final Fantasy VII Remake who have actually been at Square for a long time, they just didn't work on Final Fantasy VII, because maybe they were involved with other projects or maybe they just hadn't joined the company at that point. Either way, in terms of bringing this back to Nomura's involvement though, well, as we can see from our earlier conversation around the design changes to Cloud, Biggs, Wedge and Jesse, if Nomura wasn't as involved during the CyberConnect 2 days, well, he certainly is now. And on the project essentially starting again, well, as we've talked about before, that may well be true in some instances. We don't know what state the assets were in, but there will definitely be things that they could retain, such as design concepts and the development of the scenario. But again, it's all just pure speculation, and to be honest, I don't think this rumour really changes anything. Even when they announced the game back in 2015, Nomura was very candid about the fact that they only did so to sell more copies of World of Final Fantasy, Final Fantasy 15 and Kingdom Hearts 3, because they wanted to encourage more people to buy the PlayStation 4, and they felt that announcing the Final Fantasy 7 Remake would do that. It means that they didn't have much work done on the project, and they basically didn't plan on releasing it anytime soon as a result. The most interesting part about all of this though was that Dan Tsukasa mentioned at the end of his mini rant that he has no idea how much progress they've actually made in the past 12 months, and he feels that though if they've started to implement newer ways of project managing, then there's a good chance that the Final Fantasy VII Remake is progressing pretty well, which is exactly what Square Enix have been saying when they've had the opportunity to. In other words, all of this was pretty much a non-topic. Which brings me on to another recent rumour that the Final Fantasy VII Remake might not release until 2023. Now, we don't know if it will or won't, but what we do know is that this particular nugget of information came from that talk that Nomura, Kitase and Hamaguchi had at the start of this year. But the key detail that everyone seems to have missed out on is the context of what was said. According to the livestream.net, Kitase was actually joking when he said that he'd love to keep polishing the game until the 35th anniversary of the franchise, and Hamaguchi, who was responding in jest, just said something along the lines of, "Hey, that's a long way off, that's unfair." It was just a little skit to get some laughs from the audience. So to clarify, at no point did they seriously say that they want to keep polishing the game until 2023, or even release it then. Moving away from rumours though and back onto more factual updates, well, we have one concerning one Nobuo Uematsu and his involvement on the project, which actually came as something of a surprise to me. In the past, Uematsu had distanced himself from the project not once, but twice, although they did both happen towards the end of 2015. He first distanced himself during a Q&A session before Final Symphony 2, where he said he wasn't involved in the project, but joked that he might be persuaded if they paid him a lot of money. And the main reason behind this was that he just wasn't interested in doing arrangements of his older compositions anymore. He also reiterated this stance to French publication Jeux Video, but was more blunt, simply saying that no, he was not working on the Final Fantasy VII Remake. Things appear to have changed though, perhaps because they actually did stump up a load of money. Yoshinori Kitase recently confirmed in, of all places, a pamphlet that Uematsu is indeed involved with the Final Fantasy VII Remake. He just stopped short of saying how. As we've seen with other roles though, it's likely that Uematsu will be providing direction and guidance as opposed to actually contributing new tracks or rearrangements. You never know though, perhaps he could contribute a new vocal theme for the ending of the game or something along those lines. Likewise, in the past few years, he may have softened his stance and will want to take a stab at rearranging some of his older works again. Either way, this news puts us no closer to learning who the actual composer and arranger of the soundtrack will be, or if there might even be multiple people working on it. But in terms of predictions for the coming months, well, going back to the start of 2017, Tetsuya Nomura said that they wanted to show something at one of the big trade shows last year. And as you're all aware, that didn't happen, most likely because of the decisions relating to CyberConnect 2. Going back to that talk earlier this year though, and after joking about the 2023 release date, Hamaguchi actually said that they hope to be in a position to show off the Final Fantasy VII Remake at the next event that they attend, which presumably means E3 2018. With Square Enix also looking to host a press conference for the first time in 3 years, it could also be a great opportunity for them to do something around the game. But as it's one of the most anticipated games of all time, we could well see it appear during the Sony press conference as they look to try and get people excited about what could essentially be the twilight years of the PlayStation 4. As for what they will actually show, well, we could just see a redo of the trailer and gameplay that we already saw as they look to present an updated view of the project. Nomura already showed off the new visual designs of Cloud, Jesse, Biggs and Wedge during the talk in January that was behind closed doors, and I feel as though they'll need to surface those to the general public sooner rather than later so that people can become familiar with how things have actually changed aesthetically. Because right now, everyone is still thinking about the old Cloud when they're thinking about the Final Fantasy VII Remake and still posting up old images of Cloud in relation to it. I'm hoping though that they will at least reveal a new character. Tifa seems to be the one that everyone's been craving, but I think Aerith would be just as good. And on top of that, I would love to get some kind of indication about how the story is going to be revised. All we can do at this point though is just cross our fingers and hope that it's even shown at all. But yeah, that should get you fully up to speed with everything that's happened with the Final Fantasy VII Remake in the past 6 to 8 months, rumours and all. How are you guys feeling about the project at this point? Are you just in the same boat of wanting to see how things have changed in the past year or so? Let us know in the comments below, and as always, if you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Also, if you'd like to become a Patreon supporter and help this channel to grow, please head over to patreon.com/ffunion. These amazing folks that you're seeing right now have chosen to support the channel, and we are so appreciative. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching this update video. I do have to apologise again about the poor quality of my voice. I haven't been able to recover from the illness that has been plaguing me for almost 2 weeks now, and it's, to be honest, it's getting quite frustrating. But hopefully I'm on the mend soon, and we can put this all behind us, and my voice will actually return to normal. Either way, I will see you next time for more Final Fantasy videos.